When big changes happen, people notice. Changes could make an operation more efficient and more modern, or they could hurt the people who depend on the services. Perhaps they can end up requiring more changes in the future. Now, it might be too soon to know how some of the changes at USDA will play out, but Dr. Becky Schewe has done some early research on changes that have impacted the county level, and she's not optimistic. Hi, I'm Dave Price. Becky is the research and policy analyst at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. She spent nearly 20 years researching agriculture, rural communities, and the environment. But it's the staffing changes at USDA that have her attention lately. And she has questions about whether they are lessening support for local farmers. Dr. Becky, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate you joining here. Hey, right now, what's the most important thing on your mind? What has your attention?
I would say it's a toss-up between the two things I want to talk about today: the Senate Farm Bill discussion draft that came out recently, and USA staffing losses. And spending a lot of time thinking about both of those things and how maybe we could use the Senate Farm Bill to address some of these staffing losses.
Perfect. That's a good setup to this conversation. Let's talk about your personal background a little bit. You're in New York. You're at Syracuse right now. You also spent time at UW-Madison. Where'd you grow up, though?
Yeah, I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Houston, so not from a farm family, but was really interested in sort of sustainability. And so I got interested in agriculture through an interest in broader sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. Can't be interested in that for long without being interested in agriculture.
Sure.
So yeah, then I went to graduate school at UW-Madison, and my master's is actually in rural sociology. There's still a few of us out there interested in studying rural communities and agriculture. And then got my PhD there as well. I spent my early career in a sort of traditional academic setting. So I did a lot of research on agriculture, mostly on conservation practices, and sort of how farmers adopted conservation practices, what the barriers were to adopting conservation practices, but pretty much a straight up academic focus. So I did a postdoc in Michigan State. They've got Kellogg Biological Station, which is an ag research station there in Michigan. I was at Mississippi State University for a few years, worked with some great folks there as well. And then I came to Syracuse. And so really, for 15 years, I had that sort of straightforward academic perspective, did a lot of work with agronomists, actually some work with veterinarians, because a lot of my research was in dairy as well. So everything from sort of how farmers make nitrogen management decisions to barriers to reducing antibiotic use in the dairy industry to organic certification and what that means for farmers, but pretty much from a straightforward academic perspective. And then, like lots of folks, during COVID, I had time to reflect on my life and started thinking a little bit more about doing work that was more directly in advocacy on behalf of farmers, more directly in policy on behalf of farmers. And so that's what led me to NSAC. So now I work full-time for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. And I've been with NSAC full-time for a little over 2 years now. We are a grassroots coalition. So we have, I believe right now, 174 different members. And so these are state, local, regional associations that farmers, ranchers are part of. And then those associations are subsequently NSAC members. And we work with them to advocate for federal policy to support sustainable agriculture. So we don't do state policy, but we some of our members do. So some of our members, are Practical Farmers of Iowa, in your neck of the woods. One of our long-term members they do quite a bit of state and local work. But we, work with them to advocate for on the federal front.
And one of the things you all have done recently would be the research into some of these USDA cuts. And when we rewind several months, when a lot of these things were announced by USDA, it's hard, right? Because you have philosophically, if you're listening to what USDA is saying, they're looking at overall spending. Can they save money? Is there a way to reorganize? And they're in the process of laying this out, but eventually they're going to shift workers to different sort of concentration sites across our country, which they think will be a more efficient way to deliver services. Your research found, and as far as I know, is the first organization to look into this, how some of these initial staffing cuts are impacting us on a national level and individually per state. I'm curious, once you started seeing those numbers, what stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think you're right to highlight that there's one thing that's noticeable to me, and I think to our NSEC members, and to many farmers who are generally pretty savvy consumers of information, is that there's been a disconnect between what we're hearing from USDA in terms of farmer first focus, protecting the farmer serving aspects of the USDA, and the reality of these widespread cuts that we're seeing across the country and in local communities, right? So there's a disconnect. So I think that's the sort of overwhelming story that I've come away with as I've really dug into this. We've lost over 20,000 USDA staff since January of 2025. About 20% of all USDA staff. Every agency within the USDA lost staff except for the direct secretary's office, which actually increased staff numbers. And every state lost staff. And particularly, I've been concerned, and we at NSEC have been concerned about the loss of staff in these farmer-facing, direct farmer-serving roles, right? So I should say, just to back up a little bit, the vast majority of the staff losses, and you'll notice I say losses instead of cuts. Mm-hmm. I'm try to be really precise there to say the vast majority of these staff losses were voluntary separations, or at least semi-voluntary separations, through the deferred resignation program. So this was the program rolled out by the Department of Government Efficiency and the Office of Personnel Management, where federal staff could choose to resign and in exchange receive a variety of incentives for leaving their positions. And so that is the vast majority of the folks who are no longer at the USDA. They were not terminated, meaning they weren't fired, although some folks were. There were some sort of more traditional separations. So there were some folks who were fired. There were some contracts that weren't renewed. But overwhelmingly, it was folks who took this deferred resignation program, the DRP, right? So you might hear a message from USDA and certainly from some upper level administrators that this is folks making decisions that were best for their family, and sort of trying to avoid responsibility for those staff losses through that messaging. But it's pretty clear the impacts, regardless of the way that those losses took place, right? So,
okay, so talk about that impact, because this research allows us to see. So I'm in Iowa, where we have 99 counties. Almost in nice little perfect squares, the way they drew the state up years and years ago. But a lot of this, when you're talking about the farmer-facing interaction, these are primarily that you really dug into on those county-level entities, where this is that face-to-face that farmers have historically been used to receiving for service.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm particularly concerned about the losses to direct farmer-facing roles in FSA and in NRCS. So I'll talk about both of those. So FSA, Your listeners might know this, this might be new to them. About 2/3 of the FSA employees across the country are what we would call FSA county employees. And so that means they are technically employees of the local county committees. Some of your listeners might serve on these county committees, right? There's more than 2,300 of them across the country. These are farmers, ranchers, landowners who are elected by their peers to serve in a 3-year term. And then 2/3 of the staff of the FSA are hired and report to those farmer committees. And so that's the sort of new information that my colleague or friend, he's not at NSAC, Bernie Kluger and I were able to bring to our analysis is looking at those FSA county employees. Since they are technically not federal employees, the numbers of them are not usually reported in these public data sharing about federal employees. So we lost 8% of those folks. And these are folks who work in your county offices, who are hired and managed by your local county committees, who have deep local ties and local knowledge, right? And so losing those folks has a real impact for farmers, ranchers, landowners in every state in the country. And so that's particularly concerning. We lost staff in FSA county staff across over 1/3 of counties in the country lost FSA county staff. So about 704 counties lost some of their county staff. And then most concerning is that 42 offices lost all of their FSA county staff between January 25 and January of 26. So that means there's no one in that county office anymore who is reporting to the county committee, right? There's no one there with that direct local tie to their community and their farmer rancher neighbors, right? So that's huge. And that really matters for the operation of day-to-day functions of the FSA, right? And so, the FSA serves essentially sort of the bank of the USDA. They do your loans, they do your disaster assistance payments, your commodity payments. And so any loss of staff there is concerning because it means fewer people to support those programs. But losing local staff with those local ties is particularly concerning. So just to give a little more detail to an example of why those local staff matter, some of your listeners might have participated in the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, which was a large economic relief program aimed at offsetting some of the large-scale losses due to tariffs. And what we know now about the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program from FSA's own reporting is that 90% of farmers applied for the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program in their local offices, right? So USDA, FSA, they're pushing this sort of online framework, one farmer, one file. They're talking about efficiency, streamlining. The reality is most farmers go to their local office when they need support. And so if 90% of our farmers applied to the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program through their local county office, and then now that local county office is unstaffed or understaffed, that's really concerning.
And so are you hearing from people across the country for lack of access to these services yet, or is that not emerged as much yet?
On the FSA front, we're definitely hearing it. I would say we're seeing it more clearly on the NRCS front. So I haven't talked as much yet about NRCS. So NRCS staff are also based largely in county offices. And that on that front, it's really particularly important to have local knowledge because you need to know the local resource concerns, right? What's going on in that region, in that part of the state, as well as your state priorities overall, right? And so in the NRCS front, we saw 141 counties that had no NRCS staff in January of 2026, right? So 141 counties that lost all of their NRCS staff. And so there we really are already seeing some of the effects of this. So one of our members, IATP, the Institute for Agricultural and Trade Policy, had a great report come out recently. They look at every year the two largest conservation programs, EQIP and CSB. They look at how many contracts go out the door, how many people apply and are unable to get contracts. And what they found is a big drop in the acceptance rates from 2024 to 2025. So those programs are always oversubscribed. More farmers want to get in them than are able to enroll. So that's the sort of baseline, but the percentage dropped a lot between 24 and 25. So EQIP acceptance rates dropped from 43% in 2024 to just 24% nationally in 2025. And CSP dropped from 54% to just 37% in the same time period. So we think that staffing probably played a large role in that, right? Fewer staff in these offices means fewer staff to process applications, more farmers left without technical assistance to support the conservation practices that they want to roll out on their farm, right? And so there on the NRCS front, we're really already seeing the effects of it. And we expect we will continue to see those effects in FSA and NRCS offices for a long time, right? It takes a long time, even if Congress and the USDA decide to suddenly restaff these offices, which we would love, which would be great news.
Sure.
That takes time, right? And it takes time to build back up the staffing levels and the local expertise, particularly for these positions that require a lot of specialized training and specialized background.
I remember when the USDA started doing these voluntary departures to the organization, and I don't honestly remember if if all of this was voluntary or if there were other. I know across the federal government it wasn't quite that simple, but there was a period I remember where they were trying to hire some folks back. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah.
Is there a possibility that while this could get messy with all of these voluntary separations, and that there is a way to adjust as we go forward to make sure that, even if you believe in the concept of efficiency, and if the technology is going to somehow, call centers, whatever they're going to do to make up for the lack of physical face-to-face interaction that we've grown accustomed to for decades, is there a way to adjust here to try to build back up? Maybe not as much as it was before. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to find a compromise here where folks can still get the services they need. And if there is some magical way of making this financially more sustainable or something for taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of opportunities to improve the farmer support services that are offered by these agencies. And the sort of primary ways to do that are through things like appropriations, which is the annual budget setting process, or through the Farm Bill, right? And so the annual appropriations process gives Congress the opportunity to, one thing we've seen them do already in last year's appropriations was to put the brakes a little bit on the USDA reorganization through appropriations to be like, hey, we're gonna slow this down a little bit. We're gonna say you can't use federal dollars for reorganization, for reducing staffing levels without a little more thought going into it, right? So that's one way that appropriations can be used, is to sort of like slow the process down, pump the brakes a little bit, say, if reorganization is going to happen, it should be done in a more thoughtful and careful way and in consultation with stakeholders, right? That farmers should have a say in how this takes place. So that's one way that can be used and has already been used in last year's appropriation cycle, and we expect it probably will be used again this year. And then, the second leg could be used to appropriations could be used to increase staffing levels to give them money to rehire into some of these key positions, right? And so that absolutely can happen through annual budget setting processes. Unfortunately, what we've seen, and we don't have appropriations set for next year yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we have seen what's called the presidential budget request. So the request that comes from the president's office and the agencies, where agencies make a request saying to Congress, hey, this is what we think where we think funding should be. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that in this year's presidential budget request, there's a request for even fewer full-time staff lines. So there doesn't seem to be right now from the department and the administration any efforts to address this sort of staffing crisis that's going on. But there's absolutely room for that to still happen, right? For Congress to say, hey, we think some of these positions are key positions. They need to stay in place to serve our farmers and keep our agriculture system moving. And we're going to put the dollars behind that to make sure that happens. And so, that can be things like identifying specific positions that they think are priority positions, hopefully in consultation with stakeholders, saying you can't close offices without a clear process and justification, right? There's a lot of ways that could look, could shake out. And then on the Farm Bill side, right now, on both the House and the Senate version, we haven't seen anything addressing staffing in the Farm Bill drafts as we currently have. Well, not a draft in the House. In the House, it's been passed. And then in the Senate, it's a discussion draft at this point. And those don't include right now anything about staffing, but they absolutely could, right? It could be the same kind of thing where they could say, these are sort of the minimum levels that we think are important to serve farmers, or these are the specific positions that we think are important to serve farmers. And we're going to make sure that gets defined and that processes are in place to say, if there's a reorganization to increase, efficiency, it should happen in a careful and thoughtful way that doesn't undermine the service that farmers rely on.
As you look at this, the overall reorganization plan where they have talked about then moving out of DC, a lot of the staff into these central locations across the country, in light of everything you've just pointed out about how some of these other staffing changes have already impacted things, how must this process play out in your mind? Big picture, we have to only assume that whatever percentage this ends up being, some folks are just not going to leave the DC area, right? That might be where their roots are. That might be where they want to live. And so they may not want to move to these other parts across the country. So you're bound to lose a decent chunk of people there, you'd have to assume. As this process starts unfolding, how do you look at what needs to happen to make sure that the critical services of the USDA can still be accessed by stakeholders across the country?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. First is the vast majority of the USDA staff are not in DC, right?
Right.
98% of USDA staff are already in your local states and counties. And that goes for every agency, with some exception about research, which the research agencies do tend to have more of their stuff in DC, and the Foreign Ag Service obviously tends to not be in local communities, but rural development, they're in your state and local offices. FSA, they're in your state and local offices. NRCS, they're in your state and local offices. Forest Service, they're in your state and local offices, right? So that's the sort of reality of the situation. And the reality of the staff losses that we've already seen is that 98% of them occurred outside of Washington, D.C. So there's this messaging, and that's what I mean when I said at the very beginning about the disconnect between the message and the reality. The message that we're hearing from the administration is we want to move staff out of DC and into communities where they're closer to farmers.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is they're already in communities close to farmers, and that is where the staff losses have occurred, have been largely in those county offices and state offices and not in DC. So there's that disconnect. Absolutely, we know that there are outstanding USDA staff in DC, and they are important, right? Like, yes, your FSA county office is really important. And I would say we all know that all sorts of different staff roles are important. So your farm loan officer is really important. So is your administrative assistant in that office who keeps things running, right? And we've seen losses across all of those. The DC staff are also vital, right? They provide some of the broader sort of big picture administrative support for all of these different agencies. And we know, Secretary Brooke Rollins has said herself that they expect more than 50% of the DC staff to not relocate, right? So they are already expecting that they will lose more than half of their DC staff when they ask them to relocate. So that is essentially a staffing cut, right? And I think they know that. That is part of the goal. And that's going to, I think, have long-term consequences for the ability of these agencies to function well.
As you look at all of this, and I realize a lot of this is hypothetical because some of these things haven't even played out yet, but at the end of the day, is it possible for them to restructure the USDA with the aid of technology, with the aid of moving certain entities to different places by changing the everyday what's been happening? Is it possible to do all of this and save money and still provide the services that are necessary? Can they make any cuts at all? Or bottom line, do they have to hire the numbers back to where they once were, go back to where it was?
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball to
Yeah, I know, and
magically
it's
say
super
this.
hard because I think people are trying to figure out like, well, we're $40 trillion in debt. We got to do things more efficiently. We have a lot of smaller family farms that are struggling, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's not just a magic bullet of one thing to fix. So if there is a new way of operating the federal government in a more efficient way, why not try a bunch of stuff and see if this stuff works?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's absolutely things that are, that I would like to see, that NSEC would like to see, that the farmers who are NSEC members would like to see in terms of making things more efficient, making things simpler for farmers. The idea of making the variety of different disaster assistance programs a little easier to understand, to apply for. That's a great idea, right? And that's part of the reason that we need so much FSA county staff right now, is because there's sort of a buffet of different ad hoc programs that are out there for farmers. And it's really pretty unreasonable for farmers to try and understand all of the different programs and which ones they might qualify for.
Yeah, they're running a business. They don't have time for all this.
Yeah. There's 15 different programs, and which ones can I qualify for and which ones can I not qualify for? What might be the best fit for my business and my needs right now? And so they rely on the FSA county staff to do that. There's absolutely some ways that we could make those programs more efficient and make it easier for farmers to understand them. And frankly, to have less of a need for that buffet of disaster assistance programs if we had a better farm safety net in the first place, right? So if crop insurance served small farmers, mid-sized farmers, specialty crop farmers better, then we wouldn't need such a wide array of ad hoc disaster programs that we spring up when something goes wrong economically, or we spring up when something goes wrong in the natural environment, right? Yeah, absolutely. A good farm bill with a good safety net that helps create stability for farmers is efficient, right? That's efficiency. And so I think when we talk about efficiency, that's what we'd like to see. Yeah, there's absolutely ways to make things run more smoothly. And maybe that means fewer staff over time, right? And staff that are specialized in particular areas that can't be as easily replaced by technology, right? Because there is, and that on the natural resources side, for example, there is always going to be a need for local staff who are deeply aware of the local and state conservation issues, and who are able to walk the farm with you, develop a conservation management plan that is suited to your operation and your priorities, right? And so some of that is just essential, and that can't really be replaced with a more efficient technology or automation.
Becky, thanks for the deep dive in all of this. So many things going on right now, so many things still to come. So we very much appreciate your research and expertise into what's happening. And I feel like we need to probably reconnect in about 6 months because there could be a lot. Maybe we'll have a farm bill by then.
Maybe we'll see.
Yeah, we don't have a good track record of doing efficient farm bill process, but maybe this will be the year before the calendar year runs out. But thanks very much for the conversation. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share.
So now we will watch in the months ahead to see how these USDA staffing changes will play out once the full reorganization is implemented. For the latest farmland trends, policies, and analysis, you can check out the American Farmland Owner Weekly Newsletter. It's the place where landowners get their news. It's free, and you can find it now at AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for joining us this week on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.